welcome to today's lecture on Chapter 2, which is the self, perception, and communication. So let's talk about you, and let's talk about your self-concept. The definition of self-concept is what people feel is unique about them and what makes them similar to others. And self-esteem involves how people feel about themselves and evaluate their self-worth. So these two factors are extremely important, your self-concept and your self-esteem, and they're both interconnected and intertwined. Now there's different factors that influence communication and self-concept, and we're going to talk about these. The first is significant others, and I have got to tell you what a tremendous impact significant others have on how we feel about ourselves. And we're going to define significant others as people whose opinions we value and treasure. And research has shown that the impact of significant others has a tremendous influence on our self-esteem and what we feel about ourselves. The mass media is also a factor that influences our communication and self-concept. Think about the internet. Think about social media. Think about magazines and TV and film and all of these models and all of these actresses and actors that look perfectly flawless and airbrushed. And we're supposed to look like that? And that's the image that's being portrayed. So that has a tremendous influence on how we feel about ourselves, are the ads that we're seeing, the commercials that we're seeing, the magazines, all of it. And especially people's posts. We look at them and think, gosh, why can't I look like that? So it's really tough. Cultural influences also impact our self-esteem. The way that you were raised, the way that your family is, the way that you were brought up, the beliefs of your family and their value systems and their cultural backgrounds have a tremendous impact on what you feel about yourself and what you have been told about yourself. Also, expectations come into play, especially a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is defined as a person's expectation of an outcome and the person's subsequent behavior. So if you see someone and you think they're going to act in a certain way based on how they look, and let's face it, this happens every day, right? We make judgments on people based on how they look. Well, your expectations of this person are more likely to make the outcome occur than would normally otherwise have been true. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, you think they're going to act this way? They end up acting that way. So be very careful of falling victim to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Also, our self-concept is heavily determined on reflected appraisal. And that's how we develop an image of ourselves based on the way that we think others view us. So it's very complex. Our self-concept and self-esteem hinges upon how we feel others see us and how we feel about ourselves. So these two things are intertwined. Now, let's talk about attribution and common errors in attribution. First, let me define the word attribution. Attribution is attaching meaning to behavior. And let's talk about some possible errors that can happen when we do this. The first is individuals tend to judge themselves more charitably than they do others. So let's face it, you're going to be a lot easier on yourself than you are your friend that does the same thing wrong that you did, right? This is called the self-serving bias. So we go easier and gentler on ourselves, but if our friends make the same mistake, we're going to go down hard on them, right? Because we feel that we can do that, but when we make the mistake, we'll make an excuse for the behavior. Also, people tend to pay more attention to negative impressions than they do positive ones. And that's a common error in attribution. So we'll remember the bad, we'll remember the negative, but the positive, we'll just let that pass. I mean, think about it. If you work in customer service, you know that the customer is always right, or at least you've been told that, right? Even though you know when they're dead wrong and they're just trying to get something for free, you have to smile and give them what they want, or they'll go to your manager and you could potentially lose your job. But people remember the negative. I mean, think about the news. That's all we hear is negative. So that can get us into a lot of trouble. Also, when people do perceive positive qualities, they tend to overgeneralize them. So let me give you an example. The halo effect is when we see someone who is physically attractive and we assume that these people are also intelligent because they're physically attractive. So we can get into a lot of trouble when we go down that slippery slope. Also, people tend to gravitate towards the familiar. Remember, we talked about, in groups versus out groups. We connect with people that have similar interests as we have and who we feel that we are similar to and have commonalities with. So when we do that, it tends to get us in trouble and we attach meaning to behavior that could be actually incorrect. So let's talk about gendered communication. This is a part of chapter 2, and there are some myths about gender communication. So the first myth is that sex and gender are the same thing. And I'm going to define each of these terms so you know the difference. So sex, the definition of sex is a biological category of physical attributes and hormones. Gender, however, is a socially constructed set of expectations about what it means to be masculine or feminine or transgender. So sex and gender are not the same thing. Also, people are either male or female. That's a myth. There are people that identify as binary, that they may not fit the categories that people have to check a box. So remember that it's not that simple. Also, gender is a continuum, and that's another myth. It has actually progressed over time on three different areas of the continuum. So the first one is that we operated on a binary system where people were either male or female. That was it. Those were the two choices. Those were the two boxes that people could check. It has then moved to an area where people might be androgynous or undifferentiated. So androgynous means that they have characteristics of both males and females. And undifferentiated means that they don't associate with either. We are now evolving to being more of a gender matrix. So what does that mean? It means that we're more of a multidimensional collection of qualities. It's not so cut and dry. You can't just categorize people into boxes that people can check on a form. Okay? It's a very complex thing. And the word intersex means that people are born with physical features that don't reflect traditional male or female characteristics. So in this day and age, you have to be accepting, you have to be understanding that people are very proud of who they are and who they identify with. And I think we need to be more accepting and more loving of the differences in people instead of trying to use those differences to divide us. So let's talk about empathy and the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is a very important part of communication and being a competent communicator, which is something I refer to in chapter 1 and something that I'm trying to help you build as a result of this class. So before I talk about how to communicate empathy, let's talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is feeling sorry or feeling compassion for someone. But empathy is truly putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and seeing something from their perspective. So it's really important that we try and build empathy, because that is how we're going to become a more competent communicator. So that's one way that we can do that. The other way to build and communicate empathy is to experience what the other person is feeling. It is definitely easier to understand someone's point of view if you've been there too. And I know the Me Too, the hashtag Me Too is very popular now, but I've been there. I felt that. That's happened to me. I understand that. And so maybe you haven't experienced what that person has felt, and maybe you should try and put yourself in that person's shoes and walk a mile in their shoes to really truly understand their viewpoint. And the last way to communicate empathy, we talked about imaging the other person's perspective and imagining what it feels like to be in their shoes, also experiencing that, actually doing it, feeling it, and experiencing it from their side. But the last part is to show and express genuine concern for that person, because there is a tremendous difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry, but empathy is truly feeling the feelings of the other person and trying to see it from their perspective. Now, I want to talk about emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is something that's extremely important. It's important in becoming a more competent communicator. And emotional intelligence is defined as the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as effectively deal with and manage the emotions of others. So, wow, right? Sometimes we have enough trouble just managing and dealing with our own emotions. It's tough to say, oh, I can do that. I can try and manage other people's emotions too, and effectively deal with them. Maybe you can't manage them, but dealing with them. And as you know, we all deal with a lot of different people and a lot of different personalities, and sometimes it's not easy, and they don't make it easy. So becoming more emotionally intelligent encompasses understanding and dealing with other people's emotions effectively. So how do you do that? You need to be self-aware of the emotions that you have and that you're feeling, and know when you're getting angry and know when you're getting anxious or getting upset. So the self-awareness aspect is feeling the emotions and identifying and understanding what that is. Self-regulating these emotions, which is the next step of emotional intelligence, is managing the emotions, is getting that anger under control. I know that we all have had moments, maybe at work, maybe with a family member or a loved one, when you're in a hot debate, you're in an argument, and sometimes your emotions will get the best of you. So it's important how to effectively deal with your emotions, especially in the workplace, because that could get you in a lot of trouble. Also, the internal motivation to persevere. Emotional intelligence is highly tied to student success. I do believe that students that are more highly emotional intelligent are going to exhibit a higher level of success in college. So it's actually something that can benefit you. Also, developing empathy, like I talked about, becoming more empathetic, becoming a better listener, that encompasses emotional intelligence, as well as social skills. Social skills are something I think we all need to work on. Having technology at our fingertips, we get really lazy to have conversations with people. In fact, I find that people are struggling with having face-to-face conversations or even phone calls because they find them awkward. Why? Because we're used to texting everything. So becoming more emotionally intelligent is going to help you in your relationships by developing your social skills. So one important thing that I want you to take away from chapter 2 is a tool called perception checking. And this is something that is really awesome. You could use this at home, you could use this at work, you could use this with your friends. And let me ask you a question. How many times have people ever misunderstood you? A lot, right? How many times have you ever misunderstood people? Every day, right? Well, if you employ perception checking, this can help lower the amount of miscommunication and misunderstanding that happens every day in communication. So let me explain the 3-step process to perception checking. It's super easy and you can start on it right away. The first stage is to describe the behavior you noticed of the person. The second stage is to suggest at least 2 possible interpretations for that behavior, which is exhibiting cognitive complexity, right? We talked about that in chapter 1, understanding that there could be another possible explanation for that person's behavior. And then last step of perception checking is asking that person for clarification on how to interpret the behavior. So remember, we sometimes jump to conclusions. We assume that someone's angry or in a bad mood because it's something we personally did, when honestly it was nothing to do with us at all. So again, the 3 steps of perception checking are to describe the behavior that you noticed, to suggest at least 2 possible interpretations for that behavior, and then to ask the person clarification for that behavior. So I'm going to give you an example. You walk your dog every day, and every time you're out there, or at least once a day, you see your neighbor walking their dog, and you always say hello and have a chat. Well, lately, your neighbor has not been very friendly to you and has kind of ignored you, and you're beginning to think if maybe you did something. So here's an example of how you could put perception checking into play. So number 1, describe the behavior you noticed. So my neighbor, her name is Andrea. Okay, so I'll say to Andrea, "Hey, Andrea, I noticed the last couple of days when I was walking Renegade that you really haven't said much and you've kind of been quiet." So that's number 1, describing the behavior. Number 2, suggest at least 2 possible interpretations for that behavior. So here we go. "So Andrea, I didn't know if maybe something had happened at home or if possibly I did something that offended you." Okay, and then step 3, ask for clarification on how to interpret her behavior. "So, Andrea, I was just wondering, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do?" And then you let Andrea speak. And then I find out that Andrea just got fired from her job, so she was feeling a little down. Had nothing to do with me. All right, so remember, we tend to think that when someone's angry or upset, it's something that we did when it was really not us at all. All right, so that was perception checking, a very important tool that you can employ in your daily life to minimize misunderstanding and miscommunication. And now I'm going to talk about identity management. So what is that? Identity management are communication strategies that people use to influence how others see them. Think about it. We are actors. Right now, I'm your professor. When I go home, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, right? I'm a friend, I'm a daughter. I wear many hats, you wear many hats. So every day when we interact with people, we tailor our behavior and our communication strategy to influence how others will view us. You may think that sounds a little manipulative, but it is part of communication. It is part of what we do. So identity management is a very important part of communication. And we actually have 2 selves. So let me explain what I mean by 2 selves. Our perceived self is the person that you believe to be in moments of honest self-examination, right? It's who you feel that you are. But your presenting self is your public view, is the face that you put on when you interact with others. So the way you see yourself and the way you put yourself out there can be 2 totally different people. So does that mean you're two-faced? Probably. But then again, we all are, because we all have our perceived self and our presenting self. Now, there's a term called face and face work that I want to explain to you, and this is not to be confused with Facebook. I mean face work. So the term face is used to describe your presenting self, right? It is your face, all right? But face work is the verbal and nonverbal ways that people try and maintain that positive image. So it's the things that you say, it's the way that you say them, it's how you look, how you sound, how you act. If any of you are ever been part of a theatrical production or have taken theater or have acted in any way, or maybe you're a singer or a dancer or a performer or a musician, you know exactly what I'm talking about with face work. So identity management, the communication strategies that we use to influence how others see us, it involves many different facets. It involves collaboration with other people. It involves the multiple identities that we have, the different roles that we play, whether it be sister, brother, boyfriend, girlfriend, student, employee, all of those things, all of those different hats that you wear. All right. It could be conscious or unconscious. We do a lot of things consciously, but we also do a lot of things unconsciously and subconsciously without even realizing it. And that's how intricate and complex communication is. And also, there are different degrees of self-monitoring. So if you are a high self-monitor, you are in tune with people. Remember, when you're self-monitoring, you are examining the way that people react to you and your behavior, and then you're adjusting your behavior accordingly. So let me give you an example. A guy walks into a bar and talks to a girl, and the girl throws a drink in his face. So he tries to talk to another girl, and sure enough, she throws a drink in his face. So again, if this young man was a high self-monitor, he would realize that whatever approach he's using with the ladies isn't working very well. So that is a perfect example of someone being, well, a low self-monitor because he keeps repeating the same behavior. They say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? So sometimes you have to change your approach. So understanding self-monitoring and how to adjust your behavior to your audience is a very important part of communication. So the last thing I want to discuss today is your identity and social media. And we already know social media is a big part of most college students' lives. In fact, too big of a part, in my opinion. I think most people are spending way too much time on social media and mediated communication and less time having face-to-face conversations and spending quality time with family. So your identity is highly shaped by social media and how you use it. So the one thing I can say is social media can boost your self-esteem, but it could also strip your self-esteem. It could make you feel low and depressed, especially when you see people with their perfect lives and their perfect bodies and their awesome vacations and all the things that they have. Remember, people are putting out their presenting selves, right? They're showing you what they want you to see, okay? But remember, everyone's life isn't perfect. Everyone has problems. I don't care what they put out there. Everyone's going through some kind of struggle. So be aware of that. Be mindful of that. Be more loving towards people and accepting, because the social media that I see and the posts that I'm seeing are dividing us. They're making people feel bad. And to me, that's not the purpose of having social media. It's to lift each other up. It's to show each other our families and our pets and our plants and the things that make us happy, right? Sharing joy rather than sharing anger and despair and hate, which unfortunately is happening out there today. So again, your self-concept and your identity is highly driven by social media. Your ultimate confidence arises from a sense that people can accept you for who you are. You don't have to filter. You don't have to beautify your photos. You don't have to do all of that. You should post who you are and be genuine and be true to yourself. There's no greater feeling than just being accepted for who you are and not have to live up to the expectations of others. And research has found that college students who accept their strengths and weaknesses are more likely to show their true selves and be happy and be comfortable with themselves. So I want you to know that I accept you. I love you for who you are. I want you to be happy here at Georgia Highlands College. I want you to find yourself, find your passion, find your career path, and make the best of your life and your time here. So remember, you are important, you are valued, and you should love yourself. And understanding yourself and having a high self-esteem and a high self-concept is important to your development as a competent communicator. Thank you for being with me today.